Basin. Good afternoon. Welcome to West Basin Municipal Water District Water Policy and Legislation Committee meeting and special meeting. Mr. General Manager, do we have a quorum?
I'll begin with roll call. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Chairwoman Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston. Director Desi Alvarez. Director Harold Williams. Madam Chair, we do not have a quorum of the Board of Directors. However, we do have both the chair and the member of the committee. With no action items on the calendar today, staff is ready and prepared to present the two information items.
Oh, thank you.
Madam Chair, are you still there?
Yes. The next item is public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to make a comment?
And Madam Chair, we have not received any requests for public comment, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And Madam Chair, I do not see any requests for public comment.
All right, the next item is item for presentation. I see no presentations listed, so we'll go to the next item 5, action calendar. There's no items for action. Number 6, information calendar. Mr. General Manager, would you please introduce those two items under 6A, please, and B?
Happy to do so, Madam Chair. This item 6A is our state and federal legislative updates for the month of October 2024. And for this presentation, we have Matt Bay, our Manager of Water Policy and Resources Development.
Thank you, EJ. The monthly state and federal legislative update can be found on page 3 of the agenda packet. However, please note that both reports this month from our state and federal advocacy teams are being provided as handouts to the directors and will also be uploaded to the meeting chat for anybody else who's logged in online. Before I get into my update, I want to let the committee members know that both our state and federal advocacy teams are planning to present to the full board at the November 25th Board of Directors meeting. So their presentations will include election recaps, legislative highlights from the past year, and as well as some insight into some of the issues that we might expect to come to light next year, both at the state and federal level. And since those teams will be presenting to the full board in a couple of weeks, I'll only provide somewhat of an abbreviated election recap today, as a number of the races and results are still being finalized in California and around the country. To start off, I think everyone should know that going into next year, it looks like the Republicans look to have control of all 3 branches of the government. In addition to President-elect Trump, the Senate looks to shift from a Democratic majority, which it has been for the last couple of years, to a Republican majority of either 53 to 47 or 52 to 48. There's still one race that's kind of limbo at this point. Could go either way. In the House, there are still a few close races to be determined, but it looks like the Republicans will have a small majority this time, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 7 seats. In California, approximately 60% of voters voted for Kamala Harris, which is less than the 63.5% that Biden received in 2020. On the other hand, Donald Trump's numbers are slightly up since 2020, with nearly 2 out of 5 voters choosing him this year versus 34% in 2020. As for the U.S. Senate seat and also the temporary Senate seat, there was 2 different seats that, or 2 different elections that went on in this year's ballot. Both of those will be going to Representative Adam Schiff, who looks to win with about 60% of the vote, to Steve Garvey's 40%. Locally, there's a very close race between Michelle Chambers and Laura Richardson. For Director Gray, just want to let you know that as of today, I just looked at the numbers, and right now, Laura Richardson has about a 2,500 vote lead, which is about 1% on Michelle Chambers. However, there are still votes left to count. I don't know exactly, how many votes are left to count. I think about 80% of ballots have been counted by this time. Could be a little more, but it is a very small lead at this time. In Assembly District 42, this is on the state side, Assembly Member Jackie Irwin has a 60 to 40% lead on her challenger. In Assembly District 52, Assembly Member Rich Chavez Burr has a 75 to 25% lead. In Assembly District 55, Assembly Member Isaac Bryan has an 80 to 20% lead. In Assembly District 61, Assembly Member Tina McKenna has a 77 to 23% lead. In Assembly District 66, Assembly Member Almer Suchi has a 60 to 40% lead. And in Assembly District 69, Assembly Member Josh Lowenthal has a 68 to 32% lead. None of the state senators were up for the election this year. On page 2 of the NPA report itself, there's a breakdown of where the state assembly and Senate currently stand in California and how it could change based on the election results. This won't be finalized until later this week or next, but there doesn't seem to be any notable expected swings between the number of Democrat and Republican representatives. That is, that Democrats will continue to have a supermajority in both the Assembly and the Senate. And all the new members are expected to be sworn in the week of December 2nd, so in just a few weeks. In addition, Proposition 4, which is the climate resiliency bond that was supported by this board, is currently passing by a vote of roughly 60 to 40% statewide. In LA County, it's even higher at about 64 to 36% in favor. So it looks like, or pretty much has been declared that will pass. This is a win for water agencies and environmental interests. And even though the water industry didn't get as much funding as we initially asked for, it still will open up new opportunities in funding for water recycling, conservation, groundwater capture, and other continued areas of need for water agencies. On page 3 of the NPA report, you can view a summary table of the other statewide measures that went before voters last week. As of yesterday, 6 out of the 10 measures looked to be passing. And then more locally, Measure G, which is an LA County measure, which would essentially allow for the expansion of the LA County Board of Supervisors from 5 to 9 seats. That looks to have successfully passed by a narrow but 51 to 49% split. So if implementing the provisions of that measure will take nearly a decade until 2032, with the 9 new divisions not going into effect until the 2032 redistricting process has been completed. Between now and then, other things will go into effect, but the actual seats themselves will not happen until 2032. Last week, staff provided a summary of our local elections to the board as well. That was sent out by our board secretary. We plan to update that report once all vote counting has concluded for our city councils in all 17 cities. Also, in response to the re-election of Donald Trump, California Governor Newsom has called for a special legislative session that will begin on December 2nd. The purpose of this session is to put together increased funding for defending California's policies against the expected challenges from a Trump administration. Funding could be used to pay for legal defense bills associated with challenging the federal government on environmental programs, disaster aid, abortion, and other issues. Finally, I want to mention that the State Water Board recently released a draft of possible updates to the Bay Delta Plan for public review and comment. This is something that Metropolitan Water District and all state water contractors have a very vested interest in. The Bay Delta Plan establishes beneficial uses of water in the watershed, water quality and flow objectives, and an implementation program that includes monitoring and reporting requirements. California law requires the State Water Board to periodically review and adopt water quality control plans for all of the surface waters in response to changing conditions. These plans can impact state and federal water operations, animal species, environmental habitats, agriculture, voluntary agreements, and more. A final decision on the updated plan is expected in 2025 following public workshops and a number of comment periods. In its report this month, NPA has identified this as one of the issues that California and the incoming federal government could clash on in the coming months and or years. I also want to note that staff is currently reviewing our legislative priorities for the upcoming year. We produced a policy and principles document last year, and we'll bring any updates to this committee and the board for review and approval in the next month or two. Staff is also looking at our state and federal representatives to see if there are any potential legislator of the year awardees that we want to make recommendations on for 2024. And we're also updating our legislative briefing book that we use during our trips out to Sacramento and Washington, D.C. And speaking to that, staff has begun working with both our state and federal advocacy teams to begin identifying potential dates or weeks for our 2025 lobbying trips. We're still waiting on the 2025 legislative calendars to be finalized before we make these recommendations, but we'll likely shoot for similar dates as the past couple of years, which were early to mid-March for our Sacramento trip and early to mid-April for our federal trip. I know that Easter and spring break is very late this year, so that might impact our federal trip, but we'll keep all the directors updated on that. And that concludes my state report. Are there any questions before I move over to the federal update?
Are there any questions? Director Deere?
No questions, thank you.
Matt, I do have a question. When will what's the date for concluding all the voting counting or for vote election to be certified? I guess that's the question.
That is a great question, Director Gray. I don't think there's a hard and fast deadline on when it needs to be done, but I would imagine that they'll have much more clarity within either the end of this week or by early next week. I would think most of the voting should be wrapped up. So I would think within a week we should know. As long as there's no recount requests or anything like that, which is still a possibility in a close election.
Yeah, I think there is a date that kind of is there for when elections are certified. So if you could just check that out and just send me a text or something, or EJ, if you guys could do that. But I think there is a date when elections are certified. Thank you, though. Thank you, Matt, for that report. Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And actually, Director Gray, somebody did just provide me a certification deadline here. Thank you, Augustine. And that shows for California, it's December 5th. Of course, they could declare it before that, but that's the official certification deadline.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. Okay, no questions, and we'll go to the next report. And thank you, Matt, for his report. Very good. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Director Gray. I'll now move to the federal report, and that was also provided as a handout today, and will also be uploaded to the chat if it hasn't already. And I already touched on how the general election last week had resulted in all three branches of the government moving to Republican control. That means that President-elect Trump and his administration will have at least the next couple of years to develop and implement their vision for the country before we get to midterm elections. And as stated in the VSA report this month, Trump will be returning to the White House, somewhat of a more dominant force than in his first term, when Republicans were more split over him, and he was completely new to the DC political machine. This time, he seems to have a closer and more trusted circle of members that he can use to help drive his agenda over the next 4 years. The monthly VSA report does a good job of providing some preliminary insights into the presidential, Senate, and House election results. But as I mentioned, the VSA team will provide a more robust and informed recap on November 25th to the full board of directors. somewhat moving away from the election. Congress did return this week from their, I think it was a six-week break to finish the year off, with what's being known as a lame duck session. It's expected to be a busy 2 months for both houses, even though it's a lame duck session, with lots of activity taking place before the transition in January. This week, Senate Republicans are expected to select a new Senate leader for the first time in nearly 20 years, with Mitch McConnell expected to step down. There are 3 candidates that were vying to replace him. And just right before this meeting, I did see news that Senator John Thune, who's a Republican from Wyoming, was chosen to succeed Mitch McConnell. Senate Democrats are expected to hold their elections next month, but at this time, it's looking like Chuck Schumer is the favorite to retain the role. On the House side, the current Republican leaders are all seeking to retain their roles as Speaker, Majority Leader, and Majority Whip, but those elections are taking place next week. House Democrats will also hold their elections next week, with the current Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries from New York expected to remain in the role. Funding of the federal government is currently set to expire on December 20th, which gives Congress a little more than a month to pass appropriations bills or to enact another continuing resolution, which is a temporary stopgap, and to save the appropriations bills for next year. There could also be a push to pass another Water Resources Development Act, or WRDA, which we've received funding from in the past, as well as supplemental funding for FEMA following the recent hurricanes in the southern and eastern parts of the country. On October 23rd, the EPA announced $3.6 billion for the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds, which are low-interest loan programs for states funded through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Again, this is something that we've accessed in the past here at West Basin to help fund some of our projects. In combination with an additional $2.6 billion announced in early October, there's now about $6 billion available for communities to upgrade their water infrastructure. Of the total funding amount, California was allocated about $276 million for those funds this time around. Another topic that will surely be discussed more in the coming year is in regard to what we call waters of the United States. This is not something that we normally report on to the committee or board, but there is a pretty significant difference in how the Biden and Trump administrations have viewed waters of the United States, with Biden seeking more regulatory control and Trump advocating for less. This could be another area where California attempts to proactively implement regulations within the state in opposition to what a Trump administration might seek to undo. So we'll keep you apprised as that issue unfolds. And finally, with President Biden's term quickly coming to a close, his administration told Colorado River negotiators late last month that it no longer plans to issue its draft set of plans for managing the river in December, and will leave the next major move in that battle over the West's most important river, Colorado River, to the next president. So the federal plans for the waterway are of increasing importance since the 7 states that share the river continue to be deadlocked over new rules to govern the river after 2026. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has said for months that it intended to issue them as part of the draft environmental impact statement at the end of the year. But in recent weeks, Bureau officials have told states and water users that they will instead release only a list of reasonable options for governing the waterway, which would later be analyzed as part of the EIS. And that concludes my federal update. However, there is additional information available in the monthly VSA report. And thank you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions?
How about the most important election of all, the West Basin Water?
2 successful re-elections, and staff is prepared to sign in those directors on December 6th.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations.
I guess I'll take
to
the
those.
time.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, Matt, thank you for your report. The next item then.
Madam Chair, the next item is item 6B. It's our monthly Metropolitan Water District update. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley, our Senior Water Policy and Resources Analyst.
So this report summarizes updates on the recent activities of the Metropolitan Water District. And the report begins on page 5 of the committee packet. Just a couple of things to update on regarding the State Water Project development, and then the Colorado River. So first, excuse me, first for the State Water Project, as you're aware, the state of California owns that, and it's operated by the Department of Water Resources. And since 2019, DWR has led the planning efforts for the Delta Conveyance Project. And this has been in an effort to improve water conveyance throughout the Sacramento San Joaquin Bay Delta. And DWR is pursuing the Delta Conveyance Project to improve the reliability of water supplies, given the historical and future risk. DWR has indicated to the State Water Project contracting agencies that additional funding will be needed from the potential Delta Conveyance Project participants in order to continue the funding pre-construction work that it plans throughout 2027. And DWR is asking for, or they have indicated that approximately $300 million of additional funding is needed. Metropolitan share would assume 47.2% of that dollar figure, and that would be up to $141.6 million. That's in an additional investment for Metropolitan. That would be for calendar year 2026 and 2027. This funding is needed to continue the planning and design, mainly because of the new proposed alignment for the Delta Conveyance Project is different from what we previously proposed in their earlier designs. So a few years ago, in 2020, the Metropolitan Board had committed to a funding share for the Delta Conveyance planning and pre-construction costs. And many of those planning and pre-construction activities have been performed, but they will only last one more year through 2025. So post 2025, DWR will be required to complete additional planning and pre-construction activities. The additional funding that is being requested will allow DWR to finalize key pre-construction efforts and water rights hearing, Delta plan certification, geotechnical investigations, and advancement of field area design. So in order for the Metropolitan Board to consider their agency's participation in this project, this information is necessary and it will be used to update the cost estimate and project benefits. It is anticipated that the Metropolitan Board will consider their commitment to participate in future support of the Delta Conveyance Project later in 2027. So DWR aimed to complete the necessary permitting, the preliminary design and engineering work ahead of the potential participants to making their final decisions. Also, next Monday on November 18th, Metropolitan will have their One Water and Stewardship Committee special board workshop. And the members will receive updates on what I just mentioned, additional planning funds for DWR that is needed, any potential rate impacts, adoption of CEQA finding, and then also Metropolitan staff is going to be prepared to provide responses to questions that the directors had made in their recent meeting last month in October. Following that, a panel discussion will be conducted for members to review questions and answers on the proposed project, and they will also hear public comments from the actively engaged stakeholders. So that will be next Monday at 1 o'clock. Moving on to Colorado River Supplies. For the post-2026 operating guidelines development process, Reclamation recently held a webinar to provide an update on the process as Reclamation develops the alternatives. During that webinar, they did announce that the draft environmental impact statement would be issued a few months later. It is expected during spring 2025. That was originally intended to be released December 2024. Instead, Reclamation is planning to identify a range of alternatives in December 2024. So last year in 2023, this process began for the development of the alternatives, which will be a multi-year National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, process to determine long-term operations for Lakes Powell and Mead after 2026. So Reclamation intends to develop a range of reasonable alternatives for analysis in the draft environmental impact statement. So far, a set of different alternatives have been submitted to Reclamation by the Lower Basin State and Upper Basin states. And Reclamation continues to meet with the Basin states to refine alternatives. And the commissioner is encouraging the state to reach a consensus-based proposal. Currently, the Lower and Upper Basin states view differences. These differences include what the volume of Lake Powell releases would be, what the lower basin's shortages would be, and if the upper basin would be required to take further reductions. So that's the update on those two major sources of imported water supply. So taking a look at the board agenda look ahead, included in this report is a PowerPoint slide. It is shown on page 21 of the committee packet. There are several items of interest that will be considered next month and discussed. The first one is to authorize the general manager to enter into reverse cyclic program agreements with participating agencies to defer deliveries of purchases under various water supply conditions. This proposed program would be another tool for Metropolitan to manage water supply activities. They've had this program in place already. They're just making a refinement to this program. And this would help include additional parameters that will allow Metropolitan member agencies with flexibility on deliveries of water. And also it will eventually, it will help Metropolitan financial condition as well. The next item would be to authorize the general manager to enter into agreements with U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to implement phase 2 of the Lower Colorado River Basin System Conservation and Efficiency Program. This will be phase 2 of the agreements that will conserve water to remain in Lake Mead. This is another series of agreements that are a key part of the Lower Basin Plan among Arizona, California, Nevada to conserve water. The next item is to adopt a resolution in support of the application for funding under the WaterSmart Large-Scale Water Recycling Program for planning of the Pure Water SoCal program. As you may recall, Metropolitan has shared with us that they've received a notice of intent from Reclamation to receive an award of up to $99.2 million in the large-scale water recycling program. It's that grant funding for the Pure Water Southern California project. So this item is a resolution that the Metropolitan Board would need to approve, and that would allow Metropolitan staff and Reclamation to move forward with it. So looking ahead in January 2025, it is anticipated that the Metropolitan Board will consider the terms of that grant agreement. And then they also have an item that will be on the Finance Committee. They will be providing an updated report on the list of certified assessed valuation for the fiscal year 2024 and 25, and a tabulation of assessed valuation, the percentage participation, and vote entitlement of member agencies. And then lastly, they have an item to authorize the general manager to seek legislation for Metropolitan to increase the local agency dollar threshold for public works construction contracts from $25,000 to $75,000. So if successful, an increased dollar threshold would allow for more time and cost-effective public works contracting for the smaller contracts that are under $75,000. So over the past several years, the $25,000 threshold has been limiting when there's a need to execute minor public work construction contracts to take care of maintenance and repairs. So those are a list of key items that we'll be hearing about or they'll be discussing and acting upon next week. So I'll go ahead and move on to the water supply update. And we have a slide from Metropolitan we've shared here. Thank you, on page 22. So as of October 1st, the 2023-2024 water year has officially begun. And this is a look right now of what the conditions look like. The first page is the Northern Sierra conditions. They started out the season with a dry fall. However, that did not last very long. There was a lot of precipitation that arrived in January. 123% were above normal conditions for the Northern Sierra snowpack. That peaked at 35.1 inches in April. And then 91% of normal was the accumulated precipitation Station Index, reporting 48.2 inches. There was a good amount of rain during August. It was recorded as the second wettest August since the year 2004. For Lake Oroville, the lake storage is 1.88 million acre feet, which is 55% of its total capacity. And the San Luis Reservoir serves both the State Water Project and the federally operated Central Valley Project. That current storage level, the share for the State Water Project contractors is 50%. And then moving on to the next slide, it shows the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado River Basin-wide snowpack is above normal at 114%. The Colorado River Basin-wide precipitation is reported to be 29.6 inches or 99% of normal. For Lake Powell, the current storage level is at 38% with 9.14 million acre feet storage. For Lake Mead, the storage level is 33% with 8.71 million acre feet of storage. The chart on the right side indicates Lake Mead's operating conditions. And during 2025, Lake Mead will be operating at a shortage 1 level with a lake level that would be between 1,050 and 1,075 feet in elevation. For 2026, there's a 93% chance that shortage will continue. That forecast is based on Reclamation's annual August 2024 month study. That study projects that Lake Mead to operate under a Tier 1 shortage condition with a lower basin drought contingency plan contribution for Arizona and Nevada, along with Minute 323 water saving contribution for Mexico. That shortage has been ongoing since 2022. However, as you know, Metropolitan supplies are not impacted during the Tier 1 shortage. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here is a look at the start of the current water year. We'll continue to look at this as the year progresses. And at the bottom of the left corner is the graphic for Diamond Valley Lake. And Diamond Valley Lake is 97% full. There's much improvement here compared to last year. So that will end this on a good news story. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Are there any questions? Director Deere?
No, thank you.
Okay. No questions, and Tammy, thank you for that very thorough report. Thank you. The next item, EJ?
Madam Chair, that brings us to closed session items, and staff has no closed session items, which brings us to item 8, director's comments and future agenda items.
Director Deere, comment?
No comments.
All right, I want to thank staff, everyone for their reports this afternoon. And with that, there's no other agenda items, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.